I want my kids to be able to go out in the garden and play safely without having to say, well, is there a smell today? Is the air clean today? At the moment, every time I open my windows, well, not every time, but a lot of times during the week, I can smell the smell from other places, and I don't want it to get any worse.
Do you think
we've had enough?
The chemical companies are very good at what they do. They make a living from it, they make good profits from it. Yeah, and if there's good profits to be made, they are going to find those profits, yeah, and people don't matter.
They seem to think that they could just dump them down to us, that we won't mind or whatever. I think it's totally wrong, completely. They can't guarantee us that in 10 years' time, okay, they might be saying they're giving us a few jobs, but I don't think one child's life can compensate right now how many jobs they can give us. I think children are much more important.
We feel pretty much like sacrificial scapegoats of an IDA policy that hasn't been properly well thought out. We're possibly the only location now for these high-risk industries. And of course we're fearful for the future.
Did you get authorization to have the site in the background of your photograph?
It's public. I mean, the whole area is.
That's public.
The whole countryside is public.
So we've been going around the whole of Cork Harbour taking photographs of everywhere.
That's private property, right?
Yeah, but there's still no law.
That is Sandoz, and Sandoz don't want people taking photographs unless they've been given authorization.
But there's nothing that says I can't.
I think we should be taking a video of this art now.
No. But otherwise, you're not allowed to take photographs of the site.
Well, if you can produce a bylaw saying that it's illegal to use a video camera on a public road.
I'm not stopping you from using a video camera on a public road. You're using the camera in the back and we'll send us in the background.
Well, if you can produce a law saying that that's illegal, fine.
I can use it to it anywhere, you know.
Switzerland, November 1986. A warehouse owned by pharmaceutical giant Sandoz erupts in flames, only 3 miles from the centre of Bâle. As a consequence of the fire, a 10-mile cloud of foul-smelling gas spread in a mushroom shape over the city of Bâle. A chemical catastrophe alert was issued by the city authorities. 400,000 people were told to stay indoors with windows and doors tightly closed. All life on the River Rhine was killed over a stretch of 300 kilometres. Farmers were told to take livestock from fields adjoining the river. Waterworks taking water from the Rhine were closed down. After the fire, Sandoz failed to give adequate information on the substances burnt in the fire, making treatment of those exposed to the fumes extremely difficult. Sandoz have since then refused to accept liability for resulting health problems. In spite of local opposition and a pending High Court case, Sandoz are now proceeding with a major pharmaceutical factory here in Ringaskiddy on the western shores of Cork Harbour. Sandoz in fact attempted to prevent us from taking this video here. At a recent oral hearing held to hear appeals against this planning decision, local people voiced their fears about the damage which they feel is being done by the chemical factories already located in this area. This video explores these concerns and looks at how the IDA's policy of locating chemical and pharmaceutical industries in this area has affected the lives and health of those living nearby. This is Cork Harbour, which, along with Sydney and Rio de Janeiro, shares the reputation of being one of the finest natural harbours in the world. Today, however, the harbour is the core of the chemical industry in Ireland, with 90% of this sector located here. The chemical industry in Ireland is almost entirely controlled by multinational companies. The multinationals have a near monopoly on the 2 key growth sectors of Irish manufacturing industry: chemicals and electronics. This situation is the direct result of industrial policies pursued by the state since the early 1950s. The system of incentives and grants to multinational corporations is managed by the Industrial Development Authority, the IDA.
The original idea for Ringaskiddy was that we would encourage what we termed as heavy industry, water-using industry, port-related industry, and obviously companies in the chemical pharmaceutical industry. And the idea with the site in Ringaskiddy was that it was going to be a strategic location where it would utilise the port facilities as well as the water which has been brought to the site and other services. The chemical industry is part or one of the sectors that the government has earmarked as being a good sector to bring to Ireland. Overall, there isn't that much difference in terms of cost per job for chemical and other, say, the electronics or software industries. There isn't that great a difference, and the payback for the economy and the payback for the state is in fact very, very quick.
I lived in a terrace of 3 houses. In each one of those houses there was an asthmatic. Just up the road from me there was a child that suffered from bronchial problems. Down the road there was a very sick child whose sister is also an asthmatic. I began to think that there was more asthmatics than seemed normal. I remember growing up, I didn't actually know of many asthmatics. Now I know it's supposed to be an environmental disease and it's on the increase, but it struck me as a bit odd. Since then, from that time, I began to monitor Katie's health and I began to monitor the smell, and it became increasingly apparent to me. In fact, I can honestly say that she never got an attack that didn't coincide with the smell from those factories. Only last week, I was sitting with a friend of mine in the kitchen having a cup of coffee, and we named over 40 asthmatics in our immediate circle.
On December 15th, 1988, there was kids down the local Munster National School, where both my kids go to school now, who became very, very ill because of a terrible smell in the schoolyard, and they actually physically got sick in the yard. And it worried me, at the time, that this could happen and that children could get sick, and there seemed to be nobody held responsible for it.
Across the harbour in Cove, people are experiencing similar problems.
Well, I suppose from the factory that creates the most from the air point of view would be net, from what's coming up, being belched out their chimneys, and which is again felt here in Cove, and the people of Cove are polluted by it. There's a lot more respiratory illnesses here now than there was. Children especially are affected by sore throats, and there's quite a lot of bronchitis and asthma in the younger age groups, particularly in babies.
Local people also speak of the frighteningly high incidence of brain tumours and brain hemorrhages. Recently, on appeal to On Board Pleanála, chemical factories in the Cork Harbour area were given permission under their air pollution licences to emit up to 100 times more methyl mercaptans into the air than previously allowed. Mercaptans can cause nausea and headaches and are listed in scientific literature as being dangerous air contaminants.
I feel so strongly about the health problems in this harbour and that nothing is done. A lot of the doctors locally are on retainers from the chemical factories, which means they are paid annually by chemical factories, to be on their payroll or what have you. There is no record at all kept, to the best of my knowledge, of the actual incidence of asthma, chest complaints, bronchitis, nothing at all. No record at all is kept of the health of people in this harbour area, yet we live with this dangerous, absolutely totally dangerous industry that every other place in the world, every other country in the world realises the danger of it. And we in the harbour suffer because of the incompetence of people in the health board who do not do anything about the health of our children and the people that they should be representing here.
The vital horticultural sector has also suffered the effects of chemical pollution. Liam Carney is one of a number of growers in the harbour area who have reported ongoing problems with their produce.
Well, I'd say that we're within about a half mile of two chemical plants, you know. Both Angus there, Pink Chemicals there, and your Pfizer up the road, you know. And I mean, you've got Net straight opposite there, like, as well, you know. So we're having a lot of problems in the last 2 years, like, you know. This is May 88 is the main start of it, you know. And I lost 3 acres of cauliflowers, 2 acres of coleslaw cabbage, and 4 acres of spring cabbage that year, you know. And no answers, you know.
Who did you look for answers from?
Well, I notified the county council, Ian McLean, and he's in Chaggerstown, and their advice was to plough the crop in and forget about it. And so I notified Gold Crop, the seed company I deal with, and they got Chris Boller from Dublin, and he bought samples of the same cauliflowers from Dublin, from Russian County Dublin, and there was nothing wrong with them, you know. So he checked back then with the seed company in England, and they had no similar problems in the United Kingdom. So he checked the seeds and the number on the seed pack and the weather conditions in the area at the time. See, could it be weather affected the cauliflowers and the coleslaw cabbage? And his report says that it's not a seed related problem, you know. Well, I mean, what concerns Chagas is this papering down of the leaves, you know. I mean, they're just getting very, very light, this greyish colour on them, you know. And I mean, they just can't figure out what exactly is going on there, you know. Well, it must be something there, you know. It must be a build-up of something. According to Chagas, it's nothing we've done. It's we're doing normal farming practices. We're going by the book, you know. They can confirm this, that we're doing what we're told to do, you know. I mean, we can't prove like that there's a lot of chemical plants in the harbour, you know. But I had no problems until Angus came, which is the truth, like, you know. I mean, we've been smelling pen for a long time, and I had no problems until Angus came. So May 88 was the start of my problems, you know. Well, I mean, the council practically nothing anyway, and we've written to Minister Harney, and we met her, and she's done nothing either. And you know, I mean, the samples went to Johnstone Castle and Concealer Research, and I mean, the letter states there that Concealer Research haven't got the gear to monitor the vegetables, you know, to find out if there is a chemical emission. And I mean, like, we're small growers, and I don't think anyone has any interest in us.
They washed their hands.
They washed their hands. I mean, I think the idea now coming along and meeting us and saying they're going to have meetings with this one and that one, the other thing. And I think, quite honestly, we've been treated the way John Hanlon was being treated. He had a problem, and he solved it, because he had the willpower to carry on and find out exactly what went on, you know. But we're small growers, and we're getting no help. Like, I mean, I don't think we got the gear in this country to monitor what's going on. We mentioned this to Mary Harney, and she says she said she's getting people in from England to do a survey, and we asked her why is she getting those people in, and she said that she's got to get them in, and we said to her, like, is that the way the council are doing their job, you know? I mean, we were treated very badly, and I mean, there's definitely is a problem here, and I mean, the county council washed their hands of it, you know, and the idea of only bluffing. You know, I mean, there's no question, but I mean, the idea of coming down meeting us, why are they meeting us now? Because of Sandoz. And I make out when Sandoz are in, we're completely forgotten about them, you know?
Barry Toomey of the Whispering Pines Guest House in Crosshaven is one of many people whose tourist businesses have suffered as a result of chemical pollution.
Most of my business is from the continent. Only about 5% of our business would be Irish business. So a lot of our business, as we see it, is coming from areas that have problems which we seem to be taking on board here. They don't understand how they're lured to Ireland for the peace and quiet, and they find in places like us here now that they're facing some of the problems that they want to leave behind them. Noise levels at night time, pollution. As you can see, just across the way there, you'll see the white smoke rising from a factory. For 15 years that factory has been causing problems. I quote one instance, two German guests, mother and daughter, arrived 2 o'clock. At 4 o'clock in the day, they wished to book out. They asked for their money or a percentage of their money. As we hadn't been paid by the travel agent, we obviously couldn't give them their money, and we explained that. They told us that the place was okay, Whistling Pines was okay, the scenery that you could see, but that from their bedroom window they didn't expect to see the signs of industry. Another gentleman phoned one day, booked 2 rooms, and he said he was bringing them. Now the same gentleman actually works within the industry. There was no show, and the following day he phoned to apologize, and he said you know, the smell from the factory was very strong. Tourism has been identified by the government as being the greatest source of development, or the greatest potential for development and employment. And I see a certain contradiction in saying that Ireland is going to be sold as a future destination because of its environment, its peaceful way of life, and citing industry in such a concentration in an area where some of the biggest proposed developments are going to take place within a short couple of years.
Tourism on the Rhine was one of the businesses very badly hit by the 1986 Sandoz fire in Switzerland. This guest house owner's business suffered badly.
For the hotel, it becomes a great disaster because for the last 4 days we were fully booked, and all guests leave our hotel because we haven't any water.
Domestic, agricultural and industrial wastes have been poured into the waters of Cork Harbour with little control. There are already 16 companies discharging 11 million tonnes of waste into Cork Harbour every year, 17 if Sandoz get the go-ahead. Because of the harbour's narrow mouth, most of the waste builds up within the harbour and is not flushed out with the ebbing tide, as early studies claimed. Between 1984 and 1986, the Zoology Department of UCC undertook a major investigation into the diseases of fish and shellfish in the Cork Harbour area. They found that 78% of plaice, dab and flounder were diseased, and that there was a circumstantial link between environmental degradation and ill health in fish and shellfish. In 1989, the Munster Provincial Council of the Irish Federation of Sea Anglers voted Cork Harbour the worst pollution black spot in the province. The most recent study of Cork Harbour waters found the levels of nitrates, ammonia, phosphates, nickel, zinc and human bacteria to be all above EC permitted limits.
Well, when I was growing up here in Cove, a long time ago now, it was a lovely, clean town. Healthy area to live, and mainly our main occupation, pastime at the time, was swimming. And every child in Cove spent their summers down swimming in Coskinny, White Point, down the Bats, down the Camber. And at that time, well, there was no money to go anywhere else. Holidays were unheard of because large families and unemployment and all the rest of it. So now it was safe. You could go down there, spend the day there, and they needn't worry where you were. And the main thing was swimming in the water. It was beautiful, it was clean. You could actually see, at high tide, you could actually see the bottom and dive down and see some pebble or some bit of moss or something and dive down actually and see what you were diving down to. Well, that's no longer possible.
We have built up the largest sea angling operation in Ireland, and a big contribution towards that is the sheltered waters of Cork Harbour. We are able to promise fishing irrespective of the weather. In the centre of the channel there is a turbid bank which up to a couple of years ago was producing quite a lot of our specimen fish. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we accounted for something like 75% of the Dutch specimen fish that were recorded. Last year we had none. For the last 2 years, no turbot taken in Cork Harbour, either by myself or I think some of the other operators. As far as we're concerned, after last year we've decided that this idea of fishing in the sheltered water of Cork Harbour is not on. It's not producing the fish. Whether it's a question of pollution, I can't swear to it, but I do know that the turbid bank is only a very short distance away from the outfall from the Ringaskiddy Industrial Development Bank and the outflow that was put there about 5 years ago. Now, whether there's a link between that outflow of effluent or not, I don't know, but at least in those years, the fishing in Cork Harbour has declined to the point where it's really unfishable at this stage.
One of the things that Ireland has got going for it at the moment is a clean environment. One of the good things about Cork Harbour is that in comparison to other European estuaries, it remains comparatively unpolluted. The writing's already on the wall. People don't develop here sensibly, then by the time industry has developed a significant base here in 10, 15 years' time, Cork Harbour will be nothing more than an open sewer. So there is no way that Cork Harbour is a site that is flushed in the way that the protagonists of industry claim that it is. It's an enclosed body of water. It's a lagoon, and it shouldn't become an effluent lagoon. And we really do have to work on this very, very hard, because otherwise the whole area is just going to be trampled underfoot by industry. It is not suitable for industrial discharges. It is not suitable for aerial emissions. And if we want some simple proof of the fact, look how prone the area is to smog. Do we really want to add to all these domestic emissions? Do we really want to add really quite substantial industrial emissions to that? And what are the effects going to be on the health of the inhabitants of the area?
One of the most contentious parts of the toxic cycle is that of waste management. Approximately 58,000 tonnes of hazardous waste is produced each year in the 26 counties. Approximately 2,000 to 2,500 tonnes of this hazardous waste goes missing every year. Much of it may end up on open tip heads like this one at Carrigtwohill, County Cork. This dump is surrounded on 3 sides by the waters of Cork Harbour, with no apparent provisions to prevent leaching of liquid effluent into the harbour. Local people have expressed fears about this. They have also spoken of liquid effluent being pumped beneath the surface of the earth, and are extremely worried as to where this waste may end up. What measures are being taken to protect people and the environment from such hazardous substances, or to prevent different substances mixing together to create a lethal chemical cocktail and leaching from there into the surrounding waters? Every day, toxic cargoes pass through the centre of Cork City, which has a population of 136,000. Controls and regulations are lax, and the routes into and around the city are littered with accidents. The ammonia train, with its deadly load, rolls several times daily from IFI in Cove to IFI in Arklow, along the main Cork-Dublin Railway, passing through major centres of population along the route, including Cork and Dublin cities and suburbs. Accidents and lax controls also occur in the shipping of toxic substances. Cathal Garvey, a former chief fire officer in Cork, has been quoted as saying that Cork is overdue a major chemical catastrophe, another Bhopal.
If something happened out at Nit, and it could easily happen because last year we had an explosion. We had an explosion in Nit and the whole of Cove shook. I mean, my home here, it just shook. And I got scared. And I often thought that how would we get out of Cove if anything happened? And how would we all get out, because there's only one bridge and it's a very narrow bridge. I mean, we'd have to swim across, that's the only thing. We'd have to swim across the river to get to the other side. And what if we had small children? What's going to happen to those?
There are so many modern methods of policing and baseline studies being done that all the particular pollutants can be measured. They can be measured by various instruments and various methods and recorded in graphs and charts and things like that and made available to the local authority. And all that really needs to be checked is that the baseline on which the instruments or whatever are set are actually set right and correct, and that there's not erroneous readings coming out. So it's up to the local authorities to ensure that there's sufficient monitoring equipment within the particular industrial complexes to give them sufficient information to ensure that the environment is being protected.
There are problems in Cork Harbour arising from urban and domestic wastes, and there are also problems, we think, arising from the discharge of industrial waste. Part of the problem, of course, in working out what's going on in Cork Harbour is that there's such a poor level of previous research. There is no baseline data, and of course that's something else that needs to be addressed very urgently.
Central to the policy of locating polluting industries in Cork Harbour is the concept of assimilative capacity. According to this theory, a body of water can cope with quantities of waste up to a certain level without any adverse effects.
Yeah, the assimilative capacity of the harbour is readily definable because, and I don't want to become too technical here, a lot of what it depends on really is the tidal prism. This is the volume of water which moves in and moves out and is replacing the water in the harbour at every exchange of tides. And it has been calculated out what actually the pollution or what the actual pollution load can be that can be discharged into that volume of water. And the county council would be aware of this and would obviously limit and dispose among the various industries who are at present there and anticipated to come in the future a certain amount of that pollution load that the harbour would absorb. Now,
the whole notion of assimilative capacity is a notion that is really falling into disrepute in scientific circles. Assimilative capacity implies that you can accept some degradation of the environment and that you can continue to discharge things in the absence of proof of harm. We would try to put things the other way around, if you like, and subscribe to the precautionary principle, which basically says if in doubt about the effects you're going to have on the marine environment, don't pump it out there.
Many of the complaints of Cork Harbour residents focus on the lack of adequate monitoring.
Ever before Sandoz came in, we had been complaining to the authorities about their failure to monitor this industry. We know from experience, I know from personal experience, that I can give several instances in which I rang the county council, and by the time they came down from Clashboy, which is at least a half an hour or 3/4 of an hour car journey to where I live, that by the time they came down, the smell was way off Roach's Point somewhere. And very often they stood outside my door and discussed with me where I thought the smell came from. Now I have to say that I am a layperson. I certainly couldn't tell from which chemical plant that smell was emitting. And there are 2 major suspects, but there are other suspects in the area as well.
And the monitoring agency, Cork County Council is perhaps one of the best equipped to do this role, and I think as well with the Environmental Protection Agency coming on stream, it means that it will be able to be monitored properly and better than it has been in the past.
When I notified Ian McLean, I said it was 6 weeks before anyone came, you know. So during that time then the crop just melted away, you know. So they put it down into just bacterial soft rot or something, you know. And we got no answers, we got no report. And we'll have the same problems again this year, you know.
The onus is on the local authority under the Planning Act and under the Air Pollution Act to monitor the effluent in the harbour, or to monitor any discharges. Now there seems to be an idea going around that this means that people from Cork County Council or whatever local authority must be clambering all around that plant morning, noon and night. That is not what it's about at all.
I've stood at the door with them and licked my finger, and we both wondered which way the wind was blowing. And I don't think that's fair on them. They don't have the staff, they don't have the equipment, and they certainly don't have the money. They don't have the backup. But they're constantly being expected to do an impossible job, to monitor a huge, high-tech industry, and I would say a concentration of this industry. And it's the concentration of this industry in the Ringaskiddy area that gives most of the residents in that area the greatest of concern.
Opposition to Sandoz is the latest in a long history of opposition to toxic capital in Ireland.
I think children are much more important.